Good evening and welcome to the New York Symposium with Diane Sayre. I'm Diane Sayre and I apologize that we're starting a little bit late. Today is Friday, May 10th, 2024. As people know, Jose Vega and I are in the throes of this completely absurdly impossible petitioning campaign. I'm at an Airbnb, so I want everyone to know that the poster behind me is not my own or something I wish to promote, but is perhaps a good reason why we need to revive the music and the legacy of Ludwig van Beethoven, who was a genius and who inspired the American genius Lyndon LaRouche to write many of his papers on the question of art and physical science, the most famous perhaps being Think Like Beethoven, Beethoven as a physical scientist, and many, many others. Now, it turns out that yesterday, May 9th, was VE Day. That's the 79th anniversary of the defeat of the Nazis in Europe. Now, in the United States, you wouldn't know this. There were no celebrations, no parades. Americans no longer celebrate defeating fascism because we are defending fascism all over the world, whether it's promoting the neo-Nazi Azov battalion in Ukraine for a war against Russia, or whether promoting the Israeli Defense Forces who are using manuals written by Nazi generals such as General Stroop, who was the commander of cleaning out the Warsaw Ghetto and driving tens of thousands of Jews to their death, the ones who were fighting back. The United States is on the wrong side in every case. So I guess, therefore, our government wishes to spit on the legacy of those Americans who fought and died to liberate the world from Nazism and who vowed never again. We have it again. And in fact, we have an extremely dangerous situation now because of the insanity of the West refusing to drop its commitment to destroy Russia. People like the French President Emmanuel Macron threatening to send ground troops to Ukraine, the British Foreign Minister David Cameron saying that Britain will send longer range missiles to Ukraine so they can strike deep within Russia. Russia is now launching or practicing exercises for the use of tactical nuclear weapons in Europe. And as former UN weapons inspector Scott Ritter said on the International Peace Coalition call today, Putin is not bluffing. The Western leaders are arrogant fools to say that this is just a bluff, that Russia would never do this. Russia's been very clear. If they perceive an existential threat to Russia, that is the one reason they would use nuclear weapons. They've been very clear, much clearer than the United States, in fact. So we are in an excruciatingly dangerous situation. Most Americans aren't even aware of it. What we are being treated to is insane, hysterical press coverage about the fact that tens of thousands of university students are out in the streets building encampments to protest the genocide in Gaza and now the escalation of genocide with Israel's attack on Rafah, even though Hamas was prepared to negotiate a truce and even non-permanent ceasefire. Netanyahu did not want that. He clearly doesn't care about the hostages. So if you're in the streets of Manhattan, as I was 2 days ago getting signatures, people say, what do you think about the anti-Semitism on campus? And I asked one person I said, well, do you feel unsafe? She said, well, no, but I'm not on campus. We were 10 blocks from the campus. One of my other friends said, well, you're probably safer on campus than the Palestinian children are in Gaza. And in fact, I haven't heard of any Jewish students being assaulted at Columbia. In fact, many of them are involved in the protest because they don't want to be supporting genocidal policies. However, one 55-year-old, I don't know if she was a professor, who was involved in the protest in front of the home of one of the board of trustee members, was struck by a vehicle driven by, I believe, the nephew of Meyer Kahana, the famous JDL mafia hitman. So you are in danger if you're protesting genocide in the United States. One of the faculty members of Columbia was arrested merely for stepping out of his apartment onto the sidewalk to film the police arresting students. So in the middle of all this chaos, people may say, well, why? How can we think about Beethoven? Do we have time to think about Beethoven? Well, think about the time in which Beethoven lived, or the time in which Bach lived, not so very long after 100 years of brutal religious war, or Beethoven's case during the rise of Napoleon and the failed French Revolution. It's very important, as Schiller said, that when there are turning points in history, when there are transitional moments in history, you need a culture which elevates and ennobles the population. And this Beethoven was a complete genius. And he was also very conscious of his relationship to the principles of natural law, the principles of universal love of mankind. He said apparently that if people understood his music, there would be no more war. So we have now also this week not only the 79th anniversary of VE Day, but the 200th anniversary of the premiere performance of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. And right on schedule, the Ukrainian Canadian wife of the director of the Metropolitan Opera Company, Peter Gelb is his name. His wife's name is Carrie Lynn Wilson. She apparently is a rather accomplished conductor of sorts, and she wants to have performances of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony all over Europe, where instead of the word from Schiller's poem Freude, joy, Freude, right? She wants to have the word Slava, as in Slava Ukraini, the slogan shouted by the Banderists who supported Adolf Hitler. And she said this would be better and more profound. You know, who needs brotherly love? You certainly don't want that if you're promoting exterminating one group of a people over another. So we thought it were high time to revive some of the history, the legacy of this incredible symphony and choral symphony of Beethoven. And that's what we'll be discussing tonight. And I think we will go now to Jose Vega, my fellow candidate, independent LaRouche candidate for office in New York. Hello, Jose, and welcome.
Okay, hello, Diane, and thank you for having me. I think it's, people who are watching this program may be surprised to know, and they shouldn't be surprised, that I'm somebody who admires classical culture and classical music, Beethoven, poetry, of course, and other things like this. And I had the privilege 4 years ago of hosting a 24-hour marathon celebrating the 250th birthday of Ludwig van Beethoven. And we stayed up. I think I moderated 19 or 20 out of those 24 hours, and it was quite an experience. Now, why did we do that? Why do we actually continue to pay so much tribute to Beethoven? And I kind of just want to draw some parallels. I mean, so Beethoven is born in 1770. When he's 6 years old, you have the Declaration of Independence, and then when he's 19 years old, you have the ratification of the Constitution of the United States. You also have the French Revolution going on at the time. So so Beethoven is watching the French Revolution unfold. He sees it fail. He sees it turn into this Jacobin madness. And then in the early 1800s, late 1700s, he sees the rise of Napoleon. Right. So you have, Beethoven is seeing all of these events unfold in his life, kind of similar to us. Only the only problem is with us, we don't see any kind of, I mean, we are the force for change. We are the optimism, but we aren't living in these events where we're going we're living in events right now where we're going through extreme turmoil and despair, and the world looks like it could annihilate itself at any moment. And I guess the world was kind of like that too for Beethoven, watching the French Revolution turn into Jacobin madness, not knowing which way the American Revolution would go and what the Constitution would look like, and then to watch Napoleon basically turn France into this fascist state. And his way of addressing the entire society and culture was to create music, to create beautiful music. Um, his reflection of humanity being that it is always of the utmost good, and the beauty that we find in his music and the beauty that we find in his compositions and his art is a reflection of us. What we find beautiful in these pieces and in these compositions is what is already innate within us. That's what moves us so much when we listen to a piano sonata or a symphony. And there were a few examples. I mean, during the 24-hour Beethoven live stream marathon, I got to talk to people like this animator named Glenn Keane, who was a producer um, for Disney movies for Disney movies. I think he was the artistic director for The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast and so on. And he collaborated with, out of all people, Kobe Bryant to create an animated short called Dear Basketball, and they had both bonded over their love for Beethoven. And one of the things that Kobe Bryant had made clear was that the reason why he loved Beethoven so much, I mean, there were a few reasons why, but one of them was that when he was 34 years old, he was going through an injury, and it looked like it may have ended his career. I think he had broken an ankle or something. And so he listened intensely to Beethoven and Beethoven's Ninth, and he said to himself, "Well, this guy can compose while deaf. I mean, he's Beethoven is overcoming a physical limitation to create this great piece of music. Well, he was going to rehabilitate himself in his ankles so that he could get back in the game, and that's exactly what he did. When Kobe was completely depressed or in despair, he looked towards Beethoven as an example of overcoming a situation that's insurmountable. And I know in Beethoven's own personal case, he was coping with this idea of like, hey, I'm losing my hearing and I'm supposed to be a composer. I mean, and he writes in his Heilige Stadt Testament, and this is something that everybody quotes, that I'm losing my hearing and it's a shame because I'm a composer, and when people say that they hear something in the distance and I don't hear it, I mean I feel embarrassed. And he had fought with thoughts of suicide, and he didn't give up. And the reason he didn't give up because he said he had more to give to the world. And I believe some of the best of Beethoven's compositions came when he was completely deaf. The Ninth Symphony, the late piano sonatas, the late string quartets, all of this was some of the greatest pieces of music and art that humanity has ever seen, that came out of the period where Beethoven just could like hear almost nothing at all. And one of the biggest takeaways that I will always carry with me with Beethoven is that we far exceed any of our physical limitations, that there is nothing that is truly impossible if we actually set our mind to trying to figure out and fix the problem. And it just requires us to activate our creative potential to say, okay, well, we have a problem. It seems to be insurmountable, but it truly isn't. And that's one of the things that has been carrying us through the petitioning, at least for me, and I'm sure for Diana as well. We've been encouraging all of the petitioners to listen to Beethoven in the morning as a way to orient their minds. Sometimes this feels like a daunting task to do, to get signatures and get rejection over and over and over again, but it's possible. And we are doing it. We did it once before and we can do it again. We've shown that it is not insurmountable and we can do it again. And I mean, I'll just end it off by saying this, Beethoven proves that immortality is attainable and reachable if we decide to use our mortal life as a way to make something or be something that will be immortal. So, we still listen to Beethoven today, and his impact is still resonating with us to this day because he chose not to be limited by his mortal existence, but to do something that was truly immortal. And I think people will be listening to Beethoven for the next thousands of years. So I'll just stop there. Yeah.
Great. So I understand David Shaven is with us. Uh, Before we go to him, I would like Dave DeBroad, if you have it there, to just a completely amateur group of the Schiller Institute did a performance of the fourth movement of the Ninth Symphony, and I would just like to listen to the first couple minutes, just a tiny bit of it here, and then so everyone has in their ears, their mind's ear. I guess I'll put it that way, as opposed to mind's eye, mind's ear, uh, what we are talking about. And you have to remember the first and second movements. But here, we'll give you that idea. Do you have that, Dave? Great. Great. So just a little snip, and you can find more of that from the Schiller Institute, or find a recording by Wilhelm Furtwängler of the whole entire performance. I strongly recommend it. But Beethoven is such a genius. The spirit comes apart with a well-intended group of amateurs. So Dave Shaven, I'm glad you were able to make it, and please go ahead.
I'm glad that you had me, even though it's I'm sitting here in a car in downtown Washington right now. Look, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony was born 200 years ago on Tuesday. We don't always have to celebrate every piece of music. But this was monumental. Why? Actually, it would help if you get the graphic for the Barenboim's explanation of Beethoven. Is that possible to get that up? And for that matter, to have somebody read it for me. I just don't have access to it here. And on the occasion of the 200th, Daniel Barenboim gave a really mature, kind, competent overview about what Beethoven was. He wasn't simply a political revolutionary. He wasn't just an agitator. He didn't just simply write beautiful music for people to listen to. That's a good one. The Well, I'll wait I'll give you a little background on Barenboim. Barenboim set up the East Divan Orchestra, the West Eastern Divan Orchestra, which was Israeli and Palestinian orchestra members to combine on something beautiful, not because it was easy situation, but he formed an orchestra on that basis, which is just a principle of going beyond the limits where everybody's defined as intractable enemies, and actually say, let's go to a different place. Let's go play the highest standards of Western music. And what happens to people when they do that? They collaborate together to do that. So I don't, do you know how long ago you formed that? My advisor Nancy's here.
It's a long time ago. At
Okay,
least
20, 30 years?
Yeah.
20, 30 years ago. And I think what he has to say about Beethoven's compositional style, his method of thinking, is partly, at least partly borne out by, for a long time, setting a standard of beauty and virtue in just a horrible situation. Do you have the quote there? Easily available?
Yeah, I think I can hear. The greatness of music and the Ninth Symphony lies in the richness of its contrast. Music never just laughs or cries, it always laughs and cries at the same time, creating unity out of contradictions. That is Beethoven for me. Music, if you treat it properly, is a lesson for life. There is much we can learn from Beethoven. He is the master of bringing emotion and intellect together. With Beethoven, you must be able to structure your feelings and feel the structure emotionally. A fantastic lesson for life.
Structure your feelings. Is that fascist? You feel the structure? That's somewhat paradoxical, but it is this classical issue that human beings, lo and behold, have a mind and they have a heart. And typically people oppose one to the other. You have feelings of your heart, and then you have your mind. And, sometimes they talk to each other, not that often. Barenboim's saying of Beethoven that well, let's take the second half, that you structure your feelings. This is very much from the poet Friedrich Schiller, who's the poet who Beethoven struggled with his poem On die Freude for 30 years or so before he composed this. Schiller is famous for something rather radical, that you can actually um, examine your feeling states, your emotional states. They're not um, frozen for all time. They're not prefixed. We're getting to the point. What the punchline is, you can actually change your identity based upon what the world requires of you. Some people call it growing up, but so the matter of structuring your feelings is not ordering them around, but it's actually being honest, being courageous to go look at the beautiful and ugly things that go on inside people's heads and their thinking and their feeling states. When somebody intersects you cuts you off on the road, you have rage and hatred. You don't even know the person. But Schiller's aesthetic education, for Beethoven, he's not just going to do a pretty tune. He's going to explore why people find beauty in it, with the danger that maybe it's trivial, maybe it's just surface, or that you cannot really explore the rich interconnections of the music properly. You've just gone halfway and haven't figured it out. But as a rigorous musical scientist, he's going to ask why if something strikes the human soul as important and beautiful, then it has to be pursued, because beauty does lead to truth. On the side, what's the other side? You're going to feel the structure. And people can analyze structures. Those are the guys who are good in math in school, and they're sort of nerdy. But to feel the structure, to actually raise your aesthetic capabilities, so you're not just bumping your nose against everything in front of you, but you actually resonate and feel, just as people think they smell something or see something and it's so obvious. Well, now they actually have an aesthetic. Aesthetic is a classy word for all the richness of being able to feel, take in things, and to be able to feel the structure means really that the shape of the world is something as immediate or more immediate to you than your next door neighbor. So Barenboim really hit something very nicely there with that formulation. How does that apply? It's hard to do a rendition of the Ninth Symphony this way, but I just guarantee you, when you listen to the first movement, you'll ask yourself, it's a sacrilege to go any further. Why? This is so complete. There's nothing else to say. And when the kettle drum starts out, bump, ba-dum, for that scherzo, that second movement, it's like a different world. You think it's a different world. And then that third movement, which is always, appeals to me the most on one level, it just, it's a real never-ending melody where, anyhow, it's just, so you're struck in your mind, what is the connection of these things? What am I going through to have these three different worlds? Which it's not a matter of picking what your favorite is. So everybody knows the open. Well, what's well known is that the opening of the fourth movement, Beethoven does what almost nobody else ever does. He quotes sections from those three moods and feeling states that have been so masterfully portrayed, and he's saying, no, not that. And what you should be saying is, what do you mean, no, not that? I'm in love with that. So it really poses a scientific puzzle. You think you solved everything in the world, and he's saying, this guy is telling you, you don't get it yet, and you have to be able to go through that. Beethoven thinks you have to go through that process to be able to begin to tackle Schiller's poem. Now, so I'm going to put a lot aside and just go to one of my favorite sections in the last movement, which people don't want to talk about, which that's the melody's done, the counterpoint's done, it goes through the strings, it goes through the orchestra. There's some couple minutes where it's just getting richer and richer. You can't hardly stand it. Beethoven's master of counterpoint is going on. Your mind, as it's being layered, you finding out, I can do bigger things and think bigger things than I've ever thought before. And then he just cuts it off. And what happens? You get this vulgar entrance. It goes, bleh, 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 but it's like a German marching band. It's like a big joke on his culture, his specific culture, the German culture. This German marching band walking in, they're drunk, and what's this doing here? So if you think organizing people with the biggest, greatest ideas, you're going to meet some vulgarities and people are going to not act totally angelic, on first appearance. Beethoven's been there, and he thinks it's important to tackle that and to show musically how that new element is a wonderful new element. It's hard to recognize at the beginning, but the way he is just, it's just diabolical what he does on that. So last part. Barenboim says that what the wonderful world, I forget exactly how he puts it, but if he doesn't say it, I'll say it. This is what people are capable of doing, and this is what's missing for the most part. When you get a culture that watches how fast a guy can shoot everybody else, and or get his foot into somebody's face and twirl around, or whatever the violence prone, the culture is very animalistic, and people absorb that. They think that's what's going on in their neighbors' minds, and so I guess Jose already said it. Diana and Jose are having people before they go out to tackle the day is to recommunicate with Beethoven, figure out what's real, because you're going to meet a lot of stuff that's really just the playing out rage of a population who does not have a future for themselves and their kids. And they grab onto all sorts of ugly things. And do you actually conclude that they're basically more ugly than not, that you just have a wonderful theoretical idea about people, but it's not really true? And Beethoven's actually tackled that question. He does that with the Ninth Symphony. So the aesthetic education, if you ask the creator why he's made life so difficult to do something so simple, why can't we take nuclear plants and desalinate water and make deserts green and fertile? So is there really enough to go around? Is man's mind rich enough and capable enough that we can provide for everybody, that we can conquer diseases. All the questions that kids should be asking when they're growing up, and they end up coming up with too often with a bad conclusion. There's not enough to go around. People are basically stupid. I don't like it. I don't like it, but we have to settle for this. And we end up with Democratic politicians, cutting deals on this, that, and the other. It's all just very ugly. So we've actually got to. There's a way to strengthen our emotions, change our own aesthetic state, so that when we don't have to love all the stupid things that people do, but it doesn't get under our skin. We can take in the pain and use it for a greater good. I guess it's easy to say. You just have to sort of really go through Beethoven's Ninth and some of the other works to do that. But let me just stop there and leave that on the table and take it away, Diane.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I think your point about nicht diese Töne, not these, is really to the point, because did Beethoven not know ugliness? I mean, you think about how all of us are so anguished, especially because we now have the social media. So you see the atrocities going on in Gaza, or you see the horror of what's happening in Haiti or Sudan. We see that less, but certainly tens of millions of people are being faced with starvation. And there's a part of you that can get totally overwhelmed by that. But that leaves you impotent. You are incapable of acting when you're in that frame of mind. And something that I've been, I don't want to use the word struggling, but a paradox that has been gnawing at me through all of this is, is it immoral to be joyful when mankind faces such conflict? And then I think about Lyndon LaRouche, and how happy he always was, because everything that occurs in the universe is a vindication of the principles of natural law. Or Leibniz's idea, there is no terrible thing that does not have within it the possibility of a greater good, if we act as we must act, as we need to act. So in a sense, the horror and the pain has to become the strength which compels us, which propels us into doing what is necessary for mankind. And that is not ugly. That is beautiful. And Schiller talks about that too in his paper on the Sublime. But I'm going to stop, because I see that Robert Cashill, I think, has joined us, and he probably also has some thoughts on this. And we do have to be very brief. We have about another 15 minutes maximum. So Robert, if you're there, please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I don't think I have too much more to add. I did come on late, so I'm unfortunately a little bit disjointed from the conversation, but I did hear the end of David's remarks. And it certainly is that paradox that you were just addressing, Diane, is certainly, I think, been the experience of everyone petitioning in the Bronx. And I think, there was one location that we were at in particular, the past couple of days, a new location that we opened up and that we hadn't been to, which was by far more the most harmed place that I had been to in the Bronx. And there was just a very pervasive sense of harm and human loss, and a sort of general lack of human well-being in the air. And yet at the same time, as we were petitioning, we were getting about as many signatures as we got at other locations, because the people there are human beings who have aspirations and an understanding of their situation, and people are living their lives even in the most extremely deprived circumstances as anyone would. And I think that the difficulty that I have found in going through this, obviously it pales in comparison to the people that are actually living through this. And the ability to not allow your perception of other people's suffering to stop you from doing something about it is absolutely essential. I know I've worded that in kind of a convoluted way, but I think that is the impotence that you were just describing. And it's obviously extremely common, and it's definitely something that I have been through. And I think that it's hard to put it into words, the effect of listening to Beethoven, how it does directly empower one to take a different approach mentally with one's own the sort of sensuous conceptual process of trying to reckon with your own fate and your awareness of the fate of your own country and species as it is going through this crisis. But I do think that it is really essential, this work that we have been doing, particularly with regard to Beethoven. And there's this idea that has been floating around inside of Jose's campaign to try to put on a major performance of a Beethoven piece. So that's something that can be discussed at another time.
Did you have more, Robert?
Well, not really.
Okay, to add a point here.
Go ahead, David.
I mean, it's the phrase, so he loved the world. What you hear in Beethoven is not a fakey jakey preacher talking about love and why we should love. It's actually a struggle that he's gone through. His composition is to how to actually make love real in the world, and it comes across. You hear that, and his organizing situation was not easy. What's the quick sketch? From 1815 to 1824, when this piece was first born, he had no major works. From the time the Congress of Vienna crushed the American Revolution in Europe, it wasn't that, it was just the audience got debased. People start settling for their hopes are crushed. So they try to just look for local things they can attach to. And Beethoven was not a composer for local ideas. So there were some very private things he composed but for 9 years, there was nothing. It was the biggest gap in his life, the only gap in his life. So for that, he came out with the Missa Solemnis in April of 1824, and 1 month later, in May 7th of 1824, the Ninth Symphony is just it's outstanding, but it's just such a reaching back, and you can hear Beethoven say, I don't care whether the world's been defeated or not. The world is not going to stop now. I'm going to compose for all time. And he did. And that's what comes across in both the Missa Solemnis and this Ninth Symphony.
Jose, are you still there?
Why would I not be here?
Because I couldn't see you.
Oh. No, I'm here. I don't really have anything to respond. I think what Robert and David had to say, and it speaks for itself. The only thing I would just add to people is, I understand the kind of addiction people may have to listening to modern music. You'll be surprised what happens if you just commit yourself to listening to a movement from Beethoven. If you listen to a piano sonata and you listen to the first movement in the morning, right? Just challenge yourself to do that. Like, watch what happens and do it for 30 days and then see what actually happens to you. And you might actually find something different, happens where you might be, I don't know. I just find out just what happens.
Well, I think that's an excellent challenge. Then perhaps a good place to wrap up our short discussion, as people can see from the quality of the video and where each of us is sitting. This is a very challenging time for organizers. I do want to say on this emotion, just to draw it out a little bit, because I was at an iftar dinner where a bunch of political figures were brought in to speak, and one guy got up and went through this whole thing about the horrors. And you know what's happening in Gaza, the starvation, women having C-sections without anesthesia. He was completely gut-wrenched, tormented, anguished. But to what end? And for the people of Gaza, do they want us just to be anguished, or do they want us to do something to stop it? And people may have seen that very moving video of the children and their teacher with their little banners thanking the students at Columbia and Emory, and I forget all the campuses they named, UCLA, thanking them, knowing that they are not alone in their struggle, that there is solidarity, that people are actually out there determined to change the policy, which in a sense is the eternal fight. It's not as much as, and Martin Luther King really put it this way, longevity has its place, but I'm not worried about that now, that each of our personal mortal lives is not the most important thing, but that mankind is immortal as a species, and that our existence, we can become immortal in taking actions toward that immortality, which go beyond the bookends of our personal life and death. And in that, there really is a great joy. That is a true satisfaction. That's what I believe is intended in the Declaration of Independence, the part taken from Leibniz, not Locke, let me say, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What truly makes us happy is that assurance and knowledge and the demonstration time and time again when you discover that your actions are in harmony with the principles by which the universe is composed. And there you find the greatest joy, really. So those are my thoughts. I would invite anyone here, if you have anything that you want to add in the next 5 minutes before we have to sign off, please go ahead. Okay.
I think my favorite edition on the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
What?
It's not three separate things. The Leibniz's concept of felicitas, happiness, which Franklin studied over at the Hanover Leibniz archives in 1766, and tutored Jefferson on. Jefferson was originally a life, liberty, and property guy. He wrote that in the Virginia Constitution a year or two before. Life, liberty, and happiness is that what's the necessities of life require the liberty of man is not to do anything. It's that we can think, that we can deliberate and contemplate. So to put it in another language, you had to have scientific inventions. Otherwise, you have a dirty Malthusian world. To actually, and because man's liberty is what's required for life, it's not just a nice entertainment. That's what makes it a happy world. Not a happy world. The Creator acts in a happy fashion by having man have the liberty to do what has to be done, what to deal with this liberty and necessity are married. And a not happy world is one where God made everybody perfect. You know, that's that in a story. That's not a happy world. So anyhow, that's life, liberty, and happiness. And the pursuit of happiness is the mark of Leibniz on this thing is not only the word happiness as opposed to property. It's the overall concept.
Yes, and I think the question, well, what is perfect is that there is a process of perfection, which is not a static thing. So that's what we have the opportunity to participate in. I would like to thank everybody for watching. Please listen to Beethoven and look for good recordings, although I have to say, and some may violently disagree, but it's really hard to destroy Beethoven. I've heard horrible conductors do things that I think are sacrilegious, and somehow Beethoven is so powerful that he still comes through it all. But it's better to listen to a good recording. So Furtwängler is the go-to. Barenboim and his work, obviously there's a certain commitment there. Kurt Masur, who did the Ninth Symphony when the Berlin Wall came down. And then there's the amateur chorus and orchestra you heard that I just played on the Schiller Institute, which I always find extremely moving. So listen to Beethoven, pull yourself together, mobilize your friends, and let's act for the good to get mankind out of this crisis and get the United States on the right side of history. Thanks very much, and we'll see each other again next week.
Adios. Thanks.
Thanks, Diane.